guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Yanika. Today we have a radio host with us to discuss some very interesting, a very deep, interesting topic that is very dear to me actually. And I'm gonna have him introduce herself, then we're gonna get into it. So just let them know where you're from, what you do, your background and such.
Okay. I'm Farron Dozier. I'm a retired Army Sergeant First Class. Spent 24 years in the military. I'm the founder of a sickle cell trait organization called What's the Count on Sickle Cell Trait Prevention. I do radio. That became my passion. And I have other couple of conversations that are important around children and adults in society. So this is going to be something I care about. So definitely interested in sharing a different perception or perspective of life.
Nice. Yeah. So Farron, did I say it correct? I know I have
Yeah,
an
you're good.
accent, so if
You're
I'm
good.
saying it weird, just let me know.
I've been called worse, so you're good.
So Farron had messaged me on Instagram in regards to something, and we started talking about um some things, and he was asking, why I thought certain things, or what can we do to go forward. So I thought this was the perfect time because we're in a time now where for people of color especially, we just we came out of slavery, we came out of all the segregation stuff and all those things, but we still find ourselves struggling even today because I mean, there's still certain things in place that, keeps us down at times, and just also getting over certain mental battles from what we went through. So I wanted to talk on this topic of, what are some of the things in our community that's affecting us, and how can we go forward in fixing them. So I'm gonna have you tell us what you think are some of the issues we have in our community.
One of the biggest things for myself that I had to deal with as I looked out into society and looked out into the world and the nation was that relationship with our children. I believe a lot of the core conversations that we deal with as a result of comes from our environment and how we were raised. And we talk about, I don't like the term traumas, but we all deal with something that went on in our environment that causes us to behave a certain way. And then by that behavior, it produces results in the world. As you talk about gang violence, you talk about the prison system and people going to jail, and even the issues with the police department, or even issues with your neighbor. These are, not just government system issues. These are things that we as people deal with every day on a day-to-day basis. And my thing is how I had to learn how to manage myself became a very powerful way. And then when I was able to deal with myself, then you get to hear what other people are dealing with. Because if I was dealing with what I was dealing with that caused me to behave that way, then I can only imagine what the next person is dealing with in their behavior. So you have to be able to look past the behavior stuff and how we react to people, and then maybe ask a couple more questions. This is how I did with you. Like I asked some more, because I could have reacted to what you said, but I was like, no, let me see where she's coming from so I can get a sense of, well, why does she think that way? And if I believe if we took some time to do that, a lot of the things that we deal with around us would shift.
No, and I totally agree. I feel like though in our community, there's not a lot of civil, positive type conversations, in my opinion. Like when I look online and I try to go online, like a lot of the stuff that's popular is like people bashing each other. There is good things like conversations like this where we talk about what are the issues and how do we resolve them, but they don't really get boosted up like the other stuff, like all the crazy man, woman, whatever bashing gets pushed ahead, and so everything else gets stifled. I know you mentioned our relationship with our children, but I guess I want you to go a little deeper in what you mean by that.
Yeah, so as a man, who was a young boy, and a teenager, and then became a man, and then became a father and a husband, and all those different roles that we take on, um, even being a soldier, like all of those roles that I took on, I behaved different ways in those roles, right? And then when that career came to an end, from me collapsing from sickle cell trait exertion with rhabdomyolysis, which is a medical condition, an inherited gene that I have, um, my whole world experience just felt like it was over. And so I made it mean my life was over. And then I started collecting evidence in life that proved that my life was over. My divorce, my car broke down, whatever happened, it was because my life is over. And I got to that point where, as veterans, my brothers and sisters, some take their life once every hour, 65 minutes, right? And so I was in that same mindset of like, I'm not afraid to die. Like I gave my life to death for 24 years. And so if it's over, that's my outlet. But I knew I had a level of mental toughness. I knew I had something within me that was like, no, you can't. And my youngest daughter, like, I can't leave her like that. So I battled in my mind. So I didn't do it, obviously. But once I started to look, and someone introduced me to a personal development education, right? That was like the first step. And I accepted it and I took the course. And in that education, I learned the study of the being of human beings. So when I put my life in those principles and those distinctions, I started to challenge the first 40 years of my life of what I thought it looked like and how I felt about my life versus to what those conversations were talking about. And some of the stuff that I made up about my life just wasn't the truth. Like it was my truth, but it wasn't the truth. Now, once I realized that it wasn't the truth, then I had to look at, are those stories real or are they made up? And just by being able and willing to do that work, I was able to unravel and reveal some things that took me back to a 2-year-old little boy, to a 5-year-old little boy, to an 8-year-old little boy, to a 14, to these decisions that I made that pretty much shaped my view of myself and life and my parents and my friends. And so I behaved as such. So again, peeling those off, it challenged what I call my philosophy about life. And then I had to challenge everything else. And that gave me a level of peace because I could admit and be honest to myself first that that's not true. And now I have to be responsible for that not being true because I made it up. Nobody told me that. I made that up. And so it takes courage, right? It takes a lot of confidence or some strength to be able to say, after all these years, I've been incorrect.
No, yeah, for sure.
But that's freedom on the other side of that, though. And it seems that people pretend like everything is fine and they don't want to deal with that part of their life. So that's why you say all the funny stuff, all the bashing of men in relationships, and that's why that stuff plays such a huge part because you get to look at somebody else's life that you're dealing with probably those same relatable things, but it's not your life, it's their life. And so you get to release that and talk about that and push that to something else and not to yourself, right? So we have superficial conversations. How's the weather? Oh, it's fine. How's sports? Sports and all this. And oh yeah, did you see that? Yeah, but then nothing about that deep conversation that you and I are attempting to have to figure out, hey, what's going on with you? Are you okay? Well, no, I'm not okay. Well, what is it? Well, I can't tell you because you're going to judge me. Well, because somebody judged me before in my past, so I'm not going to be vulnerable with you because I can't leave myself open that way. So those are the things that I look at for myself that I was able to free myself up from. And I believe that those are the things before we get to the government systems and all those things that we say are stopping us. Sometimes it's our own conversation that stops us.
No, you're so right. And you talking about, not people not really identifying the truth. They're just, kind of glossing past it. I definitely could identify with that. I mean, I grew up, pretty rough, and I grew up in another country mostly. I didn't come to the States until I was like 11, and there's a lot I didn't know. And, as a teenager and stuff, you think you know everything. As even in your younger 20s, I'm in my later 20s now, you still think you know everything, but I really didn't. And it took me like stopping to say, hey, I really didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And, like I didn't grow up with my father, for example, and I know that's a one of the bigger issues we face in our community. I did have father figures, but
Mhm.
I also have to acknowledge that, the fact that he was there, like I knew he existed, but he like wasn't there, it did deeply affect me, and it did
Mhm.
affect how I went about certain things that, I felt like I could have went about better.
Mhm.
And but people don't want to face those things. They don't want to admit to those things. They want to gloss over everything and move on to the next, move on to the next. They rather bash other people than just have those deeper conversations to say, yeah, that hurt me and that caused me to act in a certain way. And I could have acted better, but I was affected by X, Y, and Z. And people don't want to have those conversations. Like I've come across, both men and women with a lot of like mom issues and dad issues, and
Mhm.
they don't even want to admit it. They just want to keep bashing on the opposite side. Because right now, that's one of the things I see trending online with social media and age and
Yes.
everything. It's like a lot of bashing of the opposite sex, but it's like, why are you bashing them? And like my father might not have been there, but there were still a lot of other men that were there for me. And, I might have been even hurt by past relationships, but I still have great male friends, and
Right.
they're great fathers, great, people. Like I can't say that all men are bad when that's not really been my experience, even though I've experienced some bad. But people
Yeah.
don't want to say that. They rather just internalize everything and project out their hate on others. So it's interesting that you brought that up. One of the
Well,
things though,
let's finish that though. Let's finish that because you said some stuff that I want to kind of address and relate to, right? And one of the like I have my parents weren't married, right? And my dad was around up until I was about 8 years old, and then he kind of vanished. And my perspective, my perception was he vanished, right? And then I had stepfathers, right? But then even though I had those stepfathers, I still was looking for my biological dad. Like that's an internal human being, Nate. That's a natural function that that child will always look for that biological, because that's where our connection is. Yes, we have men who can step in and take those parent roles, but we that child is still gonna desire that father. And I was 40 years old when I started this work. I'm 52 now. I was 40 years old when I started to reflect and search my mind about my behaviors and why did those stories about my dad and my mom like play the be on repeat in my mind. Like why do I remember that day so specifically, right? And then when I was able to grab that story and unravel it, I could see, my issues with my father. Like we have issues with our parents, and we talk about them, but then now they're so deep rooted, they're cliches now. Oh, you got daddy issues, you got mama issues. Well, there is really something going on there. And what I wanted to say was, whether you have both parents or one parent, that child is still going to be dealing with something with that parent, because you can have both parents, but we don't know, because oh, he got both his mom and dad there, but we don't know what's going on in that environment. We don't know that that dad could be working so hard being a provider, and the child has a bike and a car and all this stuff. But what does that child really want? We want time.
yeah,
So that child is really not even connected to the father, even though he's in the home, because what the child needs is not being met. And that's why I come from a conversation from the child to the parent. Most people focus on the father son, the mother son, mother daughter. I say we have to take a look at the child's perspective and perception back to the parent at a very young age, because those are where those stories get created because we don't understand what's going on with adults. We were children. I had no idea what my parents were dealing with in life. I had no clue why my dad wasn't around. I had no idea. But because no one told me the truth or explained to me what was going on, that I made up my own story.
Yeah.
So at 2, at 5, at 8, that's my truth. So you can't tell me that what I have evidence and I see and I made it mean that that's not my truth, no matter what you tell me. So there becomes the break in communication between the child and the parent, because now the child can't talk to the father. I can't talk to my mother because my dad doesn't love me and my mom abandoned me, right?
Yeah.
Now that's enough to live your life disconnected from people, just that one.
You
And
know,
so
no.
that's where I see, um, you know, the real work has to be done for us as individuals. Like we do our work, discover what our things are, and then that changes our environment. It changes our view of life, and then now we get to take on the stuff that I say that the Englishmen are in charge of, because they really the ones that run the systems, right? That we're talking about, not the
Mhm.
poor whites, not the second class citizens like the Irish and the Polish. They were put in place, right, as second class citizens to oversee us, but they're not the real the ones that are our enemies. It's the Englishmen who run the country, right? So when you understand, when you do your research, you understand that, then I'm not mad at my white neighbor.
Mhm.
Like I'm not mad at the people who were marginalized just like we were, right? So that's the start where I say each of us have to do our own individual work. And as you say, we have to be willing to do that work. If you're not willing to do that work, then you're just going to be upset, and you're going to be right about how you look at life. And when you're right about that conversation, there's no love present because you're right. And then you're invalidating people around you. That's how I see it.
No, you're very right. You're speaking so much truth with that. And I think one of the issues is, especially as it relates to the child parent, um, especially for our community, a lot of us don't understand what our parents went through.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until really this year my mother finally opened up on some things, and a lot made sense, because like when I'm younger, I'm like, why did you do this? Like, why did you even choose my dad? Like, what, I was like, why? I was confused because like she left me at a young age in Jamaica, and I didn't even grow up with any of my parents really. I grew up
Mm-hmm.
with my godmother and her family,
Wow.
so I had so many whys. I'm the youngest of my siblings, and so I just was like seeing a lot of craziness, but nobody ever explained anything. I was just this kid, like, and I was a curious kid, so I always just was questioning everything. And then when I moved to the States, I still was questioning a lot, but our parents wouldn't even have conversations with us. I
Yes,
mean, there was
yes.
a long period of time from like when I came to America to like my early 20s. I never had a conversation with my father during that time. And luckily, though, his brother, my uncle, and me developed a really good relationship. So he's kind of been my father figure.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of piggybacks to when you say you want to feel connected to your father in some way. I feel like I sort of got that through my uncle. It sounds weird, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because they actually look alike. But yeah, so but yeah, I went that long period of not talking to him. Then I went a period of like not getting along with my mother. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it really had to do with I didn't understand why they were how they were and why they made the decisions they did. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Like we grew up in the hood. Like, why would you even have kids? Like these are things that were running through my mind. Why would you even have
Yes.
me when you have no money and we're in a
Yes.
poor area? Like, why would you do that? You shouldn't be bringing kids in at that time. But as you grow up and you realize your parents had a lot of trauma,
Yes.
especially they grew up in a time where things weren't as nice as
Exactly.
it is today. So
Exactly.
they
And
had
and
a lot of trauma.
and that's where I was able to challenge my 40 years up against, well, what was it like when you grew up, Dad? Like I was around his father, my grandfather, and when he told me his stories and he described his, I was like, well, no, I'm like, well, no wonder. Well, no wonder you behaved. Well, no wonder you behaved that way. And then, like you said, they were 19 and 21 years old when I was born. They were babies. I'm 52, still trying to figure out life today. So I can only imagine what it was going on in the 70s to have a child and to deal with what my mom's environment. My grandfather was a preacher, and so you have all that stuff that they're dealing with, and now here comes a child.
Yeah.
And as children, we don't understand that, but our brain, remember, now you have to understand the function, the brain science, and what they talk about, that also all plays a part in, we're going to give meaning to life. And if the parents don't put that truth in there early, so when we start thinking about, well, why wasn't my dad around? Oh, right, that's right, because they had this conversation, not because he don't love me, no, because there was something going on, and he could not be in my life at that time. Now I could have, it would have shifted my conversation about my father early. But because, again, like you say, the parent, I think, not that I think, but as parents, I have 3 daughters. I raised them in my own version of how my parents raised me. So I missed out on my 2 oldest a lot of years because I felt like, well, that's how my dad was. So then it must be okay. So then I'm going to do, and I'll deal with them when they get older. Like that's kind of how I did it. But I had to also allow my daughters to heal with me the same way that I heal with my parents. So that I broke that cycle, because they too had 3 different stories and versions of me, of why I wasn't there or was there. And so that right there, we talk about breaking chains and breaking generational curses. Well, that, to me, that's what it looks like. When you can go as that person and not wait for my parents to ask me to forgive them. No, I went to my parents and said, look, I realized that some of the stuff that was going on was not the truth. I made up some stories about y'all. Check this out. How was it when you grew up? How was it when you grew up? And then I got them together and said, look, we got 3 stories. I got my story, your story, and your story. Tonight, we're gonna hash this out at dinner. And we sat down and I let each one of them share their story of what was going on when I was born. And none of their stories matched. So then I was like, okay, here's my story. And I'm going to be the one to say, I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive myself. And today we're going to start brand new. So I'm going to treat y'all with acknowledgement, gratitude, and fun. And that was my commitment to my parents from that day, because it just didn't seem like, I was waiting for them to tell me that they're sorry, that they want to apologize to me. But as a child, we can go to our parents and ask for forgiveness from us to our parents as well.
No, that's so true. And I like how you said, you chose to forgive them, but you also chose to forgive yourself.
Yes.
I think so many of us, we go through things and we make bad decisions or whatever the case may be, and we forget that a part of the healing process is forgiving yourself, not just forgiving others. The biggest part, I think, is forgiving yourself. And that's actually something, when I was in therapy, I spoke with my therapist, like I had to learn to forgive myself. And then I had to learn to let go, because holding on to all of that is heavy and it doesn't really get you anywhere. You stay stuck. You stay stuck in a place where you're not progressing, you're not improving, you're not doing the great things that you can do.
Yeah.
So I like that you said that.
Especially if you have the ability to get with that person that the broken communication is with, and allow them to share where they were dealing with, because that allows you. When I heard my parents what they were dealing with, they say that God, he throws our stuff in the sea of forgetfulness, right? I literally was able to transform my views of my parents, that all that negative stuff that I thought was negative, it disappeared. Like it was not even there, because a lot of it was the stories that I made up about them, which it wasn't true. So what I was able to even just take those stories, and they were just stories. I wasn't triggered by what happened in the past. And that's what I'm, what you're saying, that it
Oh,
becomes a
yeah.
weight. So there's like, you can release that weight in forgiveness, like true forgiveness. You can actually release that weight as well.
No, it's very true. And in you saying speaking to them, like, and that's something I did earlier this year, with me dealing with death and all those things. When I had went back to Jamaica to go to one of the memorials, actually my father took me on the road trip.
Mhm.
And we had actually my oldest sister set it up because she was like, "You and your father needs to talk." And I'm like, okay. So we went on a road trip and I was just learning a lot about why he is the way he is. It doesn't excuse it.
Right.
I still think he can be better, but I at least understood why he is the way he is. I mean, if you look at his father before him, you see why he is the way he is. You look at his parents in general before him, you see why he is the way he is. And then same thing when I had conversations with my mother and just knowing some of the things that she went through that she didn't even realize affected her.
Mm-hmm.
And it did, because it affected her in some of her relationships, with her children, with others. And so having those conversations are so important. And I wish more people would do it, but everyone tries to avoid things so much, like they never have those conversations. Because I think I was trying to get my mom to have certain conversations for the longest, and she just would not. She was like, "That was a rough time in my life. I don't want to talk about it. Like, I did not like that time in my life." And whatever, whatever. And I'm just like, but I'm just trying to understand. Like, I'm not trying to, make it anything big. I'm just trying to understand, like, why did you make those decisions? And then when she finally, like, was able to have those conversations, a lot made more sense for me. A lot gave me more clarity to like push forward. And I think that is one of the bigger things in helping us move forward is people just understanding, our parents, the traumas they went through, even our grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they
Yeah.
had their own traumas and then they were trying to raise our parents.
Mm-hmm.
I think my grandmother had my mom at like 15. Not my mom, but her first child at 15. Then she had like 4 kids, like I think back to back to back at like
Mm-hmm.
15. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that's a lot. And you imagine when you were 15, like having 4 kids back to back, like that's a lot on a
So
child.
imagine we dealt with this conversation when the children are 8 years old, or 12 years old, or 16, not when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, or some people never discover this. Some people die with resentment and regret, or their parents die and they're stuck with trying to now heal that childhood stuff from the parent who's gone. So my thing is, we can have conversations like this where we can create the space where people can have this with the families, with that child. Like, don't discount that child because he's 5. That brain is developing, and you have to that's why I believe child development courses are so important. Personal development courses are so important. People are picky about their religion, so I don't. I know what I believe, but if you deal with the humanness, right, that could help start to peel off some of that stuff that's in the way. But you gotta be, if you're not willing to do that work, then it's gonna be conceptual and it sounds good, and then that's not for me. And that's
That's
what we see. That's what we see a lot
that's
today.
true. No, that's true.